Welcome to day 3 of Earth Week. This year we are focusing on food, and today is the second day that we have panelists. Yesterday was kind of agricultural in Marshall County, kind of some basic nuts and bolts of what our kind of producers and farmers are facing right now. Today is kind of social and political aspects of the food system. And tomorrow will be kind of like future-oriented, looking kind of at the future of the food. And then Friday, we're just going to have fun and do a game show like we always do. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And as you see people trickling in, be sure to pull out a chair and make them welcome at the table if you got extra seats as people come in. And a special welcome to ladies from Sojourner Truth House today. We are so thankful you are here and bless us with your presence and dine with us today. So thank you. And we're going to have Erin Clark-Lupo, our Director of Mission Affirmation, lead us in a prayer to start.
Thank you. So if we just want to take a moment to quiet ourselves. Lord, grant us the wisdom to care for the earth and till it. Help us to act now for the good of future generations and all of your creatures. Help us to become instruments of a new creation founded on the covenant of your love. Amen.
All right. Thank you, Erin. I'm going to let these ladies actually just kind of introduce themselves. So we have, again, today, so it's kind of social and political aspects of the food system. We're going to start kind of with the introduction by each person of what they do, who they are, what they do, what their current kind of context is, and how they were attracted to that work, continue to live into that work. And then kind of like yesterday, I have some questions that I kind of gave them ahead of time to kind of consider. And then we'll end with some question and answers from you all. But again, like yesterday, it's free-flowing. We're not tied down by that by any means. So Angie, if you would like to start, welcome.
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. All right. Well, my name is Angie Rupp Schaefer. Double checking. That is me. So hooray. I'm the Director of Development and Communications at the Marshall County Community Foundation. I am also the Chair of the Marshall County Food Council, and I serve on the Executive Committee for Bread for the World, a faith-based advocacy organization that works at the federal level to campaign for just food and hunger policy legislation that impacts both, the dinner plate here, right here at Ensilla, but also on the dinner plates in Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka. I was first introduced to food policy and advocacy at a relatively early age. I had just had my son, my firstborn son, who just turned 13. I was breastfeeding him and so bored. And so I wasn't bored doing that. Let me rephrase. But the other part of my brain was functioning. And so I was like, you know what can I do about hunger? And I don't know why that thought popped into my head, but it just was there. And I think looking back, that was one of those Jesus moments, because I really can't tell you why that popped into my brain. But I literally just typed in, I Googled God and fight hunger. And I came up with Bread for the World. And so that began my journey. They had this cute little essay contest of, why should we train you to be an advocate to fight hunger? We'll take you to Washington, D.C. and train you for a week on advocacy, blah, blah, blah. And they wanted me. And I was like, wait, what? So did that. And during that week in D.C., I made it my goal to eventually become a member of the board of directors. That happened when I was in my early 30s. Been there now for 6 years on the executive committee, governance committee. And what Bread for the World really focuses on is how we can impact legislation in a sustainable manner, particularly focused on SNAP, food stamp benefits, the earned income tax credit. There's so many different layers of legislation at the federal and state level that impact how our food comes to us on the dinner plate and how we can make food more accessible and more nutritious for individuals who may not be able to afford it and or be able to access it in an efficient manner. So that's the long and short of it. Also, I do the Marshall County Food Council, and that's more hyper local focused here. And I'll just turn this over because I'm talking for a while. So here we go.
Oh, heck no. What? Oh, my goodness. Hi, everybody. I am Arlene Peterson. I'm Director of Operations at Sojourner Truth House and also a founding board member of the Northwest Indiana Food Council. Kind of how I came into this work, it's one of those really long stories, but I'll make it short. I'm actually a licensed school counselor, but have never really actually spent a day in an actual school being a counselor. Because at the time that I was becoming a counselor, I was like, I want to go work in the worst school district ever. I'm going to change lives. I'm going to help, all these kids do incredible things, and couldn't find a job. And decided to then do some temp work, and I actually started doing temp work at a nonprofit organization that was heavily involved in childcare, heavily involved in public housing in the city of Chicago. And from there, learned about this whole new world called the nonprofit world. I learned so much about African-centered principles around organizing and being a community organizer. And that really changed my entire viewpoint. It went from, I'm going to go in and then change the world, one kid at a time, to I can actually go in and change the world based on the systems, based on organizations, based on the influence that so many different organizations have in shaping our lives around food, around housing, and that just became my world. I've been in the nonprofit world for probably more than 20 plus years at various organizations, and it's really helped to shape the way that I think about how we can help to serve those less fortunate in us. And there's a couple of slides back, the one that says about me. It has on it this symbol. And the symbol, one more, that one. That symbol right there is a Ndinkwin African symbol from the Kiswahili tribe. And it means to transform, and it means to empower. And that's really the values that I take with in the work that I do, and constantly thinking about how can I empower someone less fortunate than me, or someone who's, hasn't had a silver spoon in their life. How can I empower them to be the best that they can be, live the best life that they can be, and just, be a person that serves other people. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Okay, Adam, you didn't tell me I was between two rock stars, but my story's a little different. I'm Laura Dwyer. I'm from the St. Joe Community Health Foundation, and I am the community's program manager. And the program that I love to do on a daily basis is called Healthy Eating and Active Living, or HEAL. And one of our key impact areas at the foundation is food insecurity. And so in Allen County, we have a severe food insecurity, food desert problem. And so we try to address it every day with this program. But really what started me on this track was a couple things. I worked for 25 years in the for-profit world. I made people a lot of money, not myself, but a lot of other people money. And about 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and thyroid disease. So that really changes how you eat, how you live, your activity. So healthy eating becomes like intricate into your life, because if you don't eat the right things, then you have flare-ups, and it's just a whole kind of messy situation. The other thing that happened is in 2004, when I was in consulting, I got to consult with the St. Joe Community Health Foundation. And that meant a lot to me because my father was a St. Joe physician, did his residency there, was there, served on the board, did the whole bit. So, and I had a mother, I was fortunate, that volunteered every day. 35 years, she drove Meals on Wheels, the whole bit. So in 2004, I got to work with Meg again in a consultancy basis. And then 4 years ago, I met up with Meg, and she said, I really need help with this project. It's called Healthy Eating, Active Living. I don't have a programs manager. Can you run it for me? I said, sure. Didn't know anything about farm markets, not gonna lie. Didn't know anything really about our healing kitchen classes and how to pull that off. But anyway, it's been a great learning experience, and we've grown exponentially, which I'll talk about later. So that's me.
All right, thank you all very much for those introductions, and we'll just kind of start looking at some of these questions here. And then Arlene, if you have stuff you wanted to reference, just let me know and I'll look for it. So kind of starting again with what we started with yesterday is misconceptions, because we all kind of have an idea outside, like we talked about yesterday. Our food system is such now that we're so urbanized that we kind of, a lot of stuff happening behind the curtain, metaphorically, and a hand comes out with a plate full of food, or maybe not full of food, or different types of food, and we just say thank you, and all that stuff is happening behind the curtains. And we have assumptions about what might be happening, but unless we really dig in or know somebody who's very involved in that work, it is often very unknown to us. So the first one is, what is one common misconception or little known fact when you think about the social, political, or economic landscape in which you guys are doing your work? And feel free to, as you guys want to, jump in.
So I'll start with, and there were some lovely pictures. I think the misconception, especially when it comes to homelessness and when it comes to hunger, the misconception is that people think it's this very sad, downtrodden face that you see. Well, that's only one face of hunger. If you actually look to your right, look to your right, look to your right, look to your left. Any of us in this room could be the face of hunger. Any one of us can be the face of hunger. It's one paycheck away from not being able to pay your rent or pay your mortgage. It's the loss of a job. It's a health issue that can be debilitating and, end you in the hospital. And it's such a misconception that people think it has to be this downtrodden kind of face. I want you to look at the face of homelessness and hunger in terms of what's a success. And that success is, someone who has been able to get control of their mental health issues, get into stable housing. It's someone like a mother who is trying to care for her kids but's dealing with a domestic violence situation, and in order to get out, has to be homeless for a period of time, but now is somewhere in stable housing. It's, incredible people who like to laugh, who like to smile, who want to enjoy the good things of life just like everybody else. That's sometimes what hunger and homelessness looks like. And
So my misconception is more around food deserts. As I may have mentioned, HEAL addresses food insecurity in low access, low income areas. So when we started HEAL, we knew there were 5 designated food deserts in Allen County. Last year, we commissioned a vulnerability study to really understand where those pockets of food insecurity were and food deserts were. And what we discovered was there's not only 5 food deserts, there's 37 census tracts. So in that 37 census tracts, we identified 110,000 people. So you have to understand, Fort Wayne is only 300,000 people. So we have a third of our population that have low access and low income to food. So our work was meaningful, but became even more meaningful. So we see the face exactly. I've heard so many stories at our classes and our markets about people who had a master's in nursing but had a mental health issue or it just runs a gamut. So there is no face. There's really no true face of poverty. It's anyone, as she said, it's 30 days, maybe 60 days from any food line, no matter what socioeconomical class that you live in. So,
to ping off of what both of these incredible women just said, one piece that I often encounter when I'm in DC advocating for, let's say, food stamps, is there's a very common misconception that hunger only exists in urban areas, not in rural areas. Because, hey, we're Marshall County, we're surrounded by corn and soybeans. And then I get to tell the senator, we can't eat that corn or those soybeans, So hunger actually is more prevalent in in rural areas than it is in urban areas. Another common misconception is how often and what types and what portions of society rely most heavily on food stamps. And I'd like to just ask the room, when you think of somebody who is using food stamps, what comes to mind? Anybody? Mom with 5 kids? With no income, okay. Anybody else? Someone who's elderly? Good, good. Anyone else? Unemployed, okay. Those are all 3 good answers, and those are all 3 correct answers. There's a very common misconception that folks, once they get on food stamps, stay on food stamps for years and years and years. That's simply false. Food stamps is one of the most efficiently run federal programs of the U.S. government. It has a less than 1% error rate, which basically no other federal governmental program can say, because food stamps know, the Federal Nutrition Program knows they have a giant target on their back. Whenever they're doing appropriations work on the federal level, they always want to cut money for food stamps because those people are relying on it. Well, those people are veterans, they're single moms, and they're the elderly or the disabled. And most folks only use food stamps for 18 months until they get back on their feet and they are able to then pay back into the system and move on with their lives. So that is a huge misconception. And you always hear this story. I love this story. I hear this all the time. My cousin's aunt's grandmother's sister's brother saw this dude buying lobster with their food stamps. And I'm like, no, they didn't. Like, seriously, no, that did not happen. That did not happen. And if it did happen, that's one person compared to an entire nation full of people that desperately need this program. So trying to dispel some of those poverty shaming myths when it comes to food stamp usage and elevating the fact that it is an incredibly efficient program that does exactly what it's designed to do is something that I work very hard on.
So I think as we're kind of moving through topically too, if you can, if you wanted to get my attention and kind of intersperse the question and answers as we move along, we can try to do that too. And now as I'm making that up off the top of my head, that means I'm going to have to walk. So.
Yesterday we had Bob Yoder here from an extension, agricultural. And he painted the dilemma that an organic farmer has. He has no market. Has to go to Indianapolis to sell his produce. How can we design something where people, where we get people who want to grow organic things get together here in this county even? You know, how can that happen? So that we can have organic produce at the local level.
I'll grab it first and then ping pong. Yeah. Okay. All right. We're fighting about who gets to talk about this one first because this is a good one. So I chair the Marshall County Food Council, and one thing that we're doing, Bob is on the Food Council with me. And we'll have meetings where we talk about exactly that topic. And what we're doing is very intentional work on connecting those farmers with the school systems to do farm to school programs. We have a pilot project right now working down in Culver Elementary. The farmers, essentially what you have is a chicken and the egg scenario. The organic farmer needs to know that if they plant that product, they will be able to sell it, make a profit, and feed their own family. The school needs to know that the farmer is following all the guidelines and everything is kosher because they don't want to get sued by a family member whose child gets E. coli because the lettuce wasn't washed properly. So what the Marshall County Food Council do is working hard on, and what tons of food councils are doing across Indiana, and which, by the way, I want to state, Indiana is one of the states that has the highest number of food councils per capita in the country. I think that just speaks a lot to Hoosier common sense, that we realize a problem, we identify it, and we work towards solutions. But anyways, to circle back, we're closing those loops. And so the Culver program is excelling to such a degree right now that I've got parents and school board members from other Marshall County school systems asking me how they can duplicate and replicate that program within their school system. So it's baby steps, because we're having to relearn how to connect those dots and find new innovative ways to connect those dots, but we are working on it.
And so we're from Lake County, and one of the initiatives that I'm working on with the Northwest Indiana Food Council is a farmers market program. And basically we are putting together farmers markets specifically for low-income communities, but we're very, very strategic in making sure that the farmers that are there are local farmers, so that if they're growing organic, we can have those farmers featured at our farmers market. And so that's a brand new initiative that's just getting started this summer, and we're actually going to host one of the farmers market days in the parking lot at Sojourner, so that we can again bring the community out to be able to learn about organic food and how, you know, that helps to benefit them, and to attach ourselves to those vendors and farmers who are growing organic to ensure that there's a market for them to be able to again sell their product.
So the landscape in Allen County is a little different. We have over 17 farmers markets. And so we have an outlet. We have two, what I would call more affluent markets, where the buyers are going there specifically for organic foods and organic produce. And so they have access and they'll pay the price, and it all works out really well. What a hill farmers, the farmers that I work with, they don't use fertilizers. They follow all the organic guidelines, but they're not certified because it's an expensive and kind of long process, I'm told. I haven't been through it. So we're doing it under the board. You know, we only have low-cost produce, so but it is really without pesticides and all the toxic things. So it's just a little different, but we do have outlets for it.
So these are quickly all blending together as we go on, which I love, and that's great. But the next one we wanted to consider, and we touched on income inequality. You know, so part of the point of, yeah, we have a lot of food, we have great topsoil and water, but, and this is a global and both national issues we saw yesterday, Bread for the World has a guidance document out that says in order to be food secure, a family's got to make at least $15 an hour to support their family. And as long as we have this wage gap in our country, that is going to continue to persist, that people then who are paid lower wages have to then go on federal assistance and use a government program in order to feed their family at the end of the month. Another thing that we have discussed is environmental racism. So the fact that you have polluting industries, you have a lack of, you have these food deserts disproportionately affecting communities of color, who has, this historic legacy that we have as a country continuing to affect access to clean water and topsoil and markets. And then we can get into other issues like age or disability. So income inequality, environmental racism, age, disability, how do those compound some of these factors that your communities are facing?
I can take that one, especially since he name dropped Bread for the World. Love it. Love it. Love it. Y'all should check out our website, www.bread.org. Especially from a faith-based perspective, I will come here and talk forever about Bread for the World. We can do an offering of letters, pray over it together, and really create some systemic change. So that's my little drop in the bucket there. But what Adam was speaking about, last year, the Bread for the World Board of Directors decided to affirm and state explicitly as part of our mission statement that racial inequity, gender inequity, and environmental inequities, racism in general, all of those are compounding factors when it comes to hunger. And that when we are looking at a comprehensive, sustainable solution towards hunger, because right now there's enough food to feed everybody in the entire world. No questions asked. It's there. It's there. What we don't have are accessibility for certain populations. We don't have enough money for other populations. And then we've got this super weird dynamic of food deserts versus food swamps. And I found that one, you just Google it. You find the coolest infographics when you Google stuff. And I guess you guys have probably been looking at that for too long, so I can't ask you guys, what's the difference? But for a lot of people, conceptually, it's really hard to understand, right? Because if you're driving and you're getting off the off-ramp on a freeway, you see all the McDonald's and you see the Taco Bells and the Arby's and everything else. That's a food swamp. And I don't want to make swamps sound bad because my parents have a swamp on their property and I love swamps. But in this, yeah, I know, right? Seriously, yay swamps. But in this context, a food swamp is not a good thing. I said that. I said that sentence. But a food swamp is not good because it's all high calorie, but almost zero nutrition. And that's why in this country, we have this dual problem, this dual epidemic, where we have this epidemic of obesity at the same time, whereas we have hunger and malnutrition. And it's because if you have only $5 or $10 to feed your children at night, you can feed them more calories with Cheetos or with Twinkies or with a trip to Arby's than you can with a fresh a salad or some kohlrabi or whatever you name from the produce section. And that's simply how it is. A food desert is where you don't have access to where you could get those fresh, nutritious pieces of food. And food deserts are, a food desert is a much shorter geographical distance than in a rural context, but that's more policy, wonky stuff. But all of that to say, people have this disconnect cognitively because they see all these spaces where people can get food, and they see folks who may be overweight. And then there's that judgment, right? There's that judgment of, well, they're clearly fine. Perhaps they're not. Perhaps that's the only food they can afford. And let's try to rewrite that narrative, shift it from blame, shift it from judgment, and then try to approach it from a different angle. And that's why Bread passed that resolution and why it's intrinsic in our policy when we try to write up different pieces of legislation or support different pieces of legislation at the federal level. We really look at how racial inequity and racism is part and parcel of hunger in America.
So that's a good segue into mine. Do you want to bring this one up? Yeah. Please, thank you. Low income, low access to healthy foods means only access to food swamps and gas station food in my areas. So what does that mean to our low-income vulnerable populations? So according to health.gov,
Is this, you want the other one?
yeah, that one.
Okay.
Poor diet and nutrition has contributed to our country's high rates of heart disease, obesity, cancer, osteoporosis, and diabetes. So when you see that overweight individual, it's not because they have too much to eat, it's because they have too much bad food to eat. It really, really has an impact on your overall health. And the other thing it has an impact is children's behavior. So it's night and day, kids who eat a healthy, nutritious meal versus those who get the fast food and the processed food. It's night and day with their behavior in school, at home, and everywhere else. So it is so key that we start shifting this paradigm and getting access to healthy food and then teaching really what to do with it. So, okay, now I have this beautiful produce, how do I cook it, and what does it really mean to me? And that's what we do in our Healing Kitchen classes, but I won't get off on that yet. But I think this is important. And the other thing I learned by studying the health effects of poor nutrition is dental work. So it's kind of buried in here, but that is, poor gums and poor dental work leads to very serious health outcomes too, and that's all a part of being vulnerable and low income and access as well.
So there's a slide of kind of the two cities. It's a picture, looks like that. Okay. So this is an example of the city of Gary. On one side of the slide, the one on your right, is kind of the city of Gary back in the 1950s and 60s. It was one of the most hustling, bustling, most predominant areas where people were moving to. The steel mills were cranking out jobs, every which way, housing being built all over the place. On your left, my right, whatever one, yeah, is a picture of one of the local high schools back in 2017 when the city went from the 50s and 60s to having more than 300,000 people in the city to today they have about 28,000 people in the city. A huge, huge change in terms of the way that people live, the jobs, the whole access to grocery stores, to just being able to have any type of wealth or income to really have access to food was a huge, huge, huge piece of kind of, I don't say the demise of Gary, but such the change of what the city of Gary currently looks like today. And I think at the core of this is people really understanding what structural racism does over and over again and how it perpetuates itself. And if you go to the one side that says government boosts and blocks, this one here. So it's hard to see, but you can find this at faireconomy.org is the website for this information. But just getting people to understand that the government plays a unbelievable role in the accumulation of wealth in America. They play an incredible role in it. And they can help boost wealth, but they can also block wealth. And getting you to understand that the blocking of wealth in America has predominantly been for immigrants and people of color. So it's not about a person that's stopping someone from gaining access. It is a structural problem that we have that we sometimes just don't even want to address it in the proper way. Again, it's not about blaming black, white, brown, yellow. It's not about that. It is the structures that have been in place that continually perpetuate poverty in our country. And I'll give you one example. So in this blocking and boosting of wealth with the federal government, one of the greatest, most incredible things that happened to the U.S. after the war was the GI Bill. An absolute phenomenal program. It was going to help individuals who worked the war, that once they came back, they had access to loans, they had access to housing developments, free loans that they could go in and build themselves and have a home in a neighborhood. The problem of that was access was denied to the majority of the people of color. So instead of being able to go into a nice neighborhood, to have kind of your suburban flight that was happening, most people of color ended in ghettos or ended in slums or ended in housing developments. So understand that the building of wealth of an individual, of a person of color, if they had had a parent that was able to own that home, and then when they were ready to go off to college, take out an equity loan from their home to help their child pay for college, to be able to advance themselves, versus, some other family who they got a home, it was a low interest loan, they were able to then build or borrow money off that home and then help to, again, build the accumulation of wealth in their particular family. Structural racism plays such a prominent role in terms of poverty, in terms of access. Another big example is, and this is just recently in Lake County. Lake County, in the area that we live in Gary, they had one grocery store owner who pretty much owned majority of the grocery stores in the community. They decided, for some reason, they went belly up. They closed every single grocery store in all of the poor neighborhoods except for one. Every single grocery store. So how is someone to be able to have access to just food in general when they don't even have access to an adequate grocery store? So I'll leave it at that.
I'd like to ping off of that, what the genius that you just preached. I feel like you're just preaching to us right now. So thank you, because I felt Jesus in the room with us right now. So thank you. That was some preaching, and that was beautiful. I'd like to echo that as well, because I feel like as someone who isn't of color, it is my responsibility to listen and to step the heck back and simply follow your lead, and to amplify. And not to say, I'm speaking for someone who is voiceless. You have a voice. I hate that phrase. Don't ever use that phrase. Whenever you're advocating, don't say, I speak for the voiceless. No, don't do that. That disrespects everybody. Don't do it. Don't do it. Big pet peeve. So anyways, but what I wanted to say, though, is when I spoke about that resolution we passed for Bread for the World, I want to let you inside on something. There was a big fight. We had a big fight in that boardroom, and it effectively pitched me and the three other millennials in the boardroom. One was a brother of color, Claire's also a woman of color, and me, sole white chick, and then all these affluent, wealthy white dudes and a couple white chicks. And there was about 30 of us. And it was about 27 against 3. And we wrote this resolution saying we have to, as an advocacy organization, we have to explicitly state that mass incarceration leads to hunger. We have to explicitly state that systemic racial inequality leads directly to hunger. And if we do not state that, if we do not plant our feet firmly in the ground and say this is what is causing hunger for a vast majority of our sisters and brothers in America, then we have no right to say that we are God's chosen people trying to change legislation. It was a fight. I was pulled aside so many different times by people telling me, could you just stop? Could you just stop? Like, this is a super awkward conversation. People feel awkward. They feel threatened. And I'm like, good. They should. They should feel threatened. Because, I mean, that's what's causing this. So let's threaten away. And I'm told, we passed it. I want y'all to know that. We passed it. But it was clear. And I made some enemies that day. And that's how it goes sometimes. Sometimes when you are advocating for justice, when you're advocating to change entrenched systems, you're going to tick people off. I kind of take it as a badge of honor, honestly. I'm like, oh, you don't like me? Cool, I don't like you. But I mean, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. But all of that to say, don't be afraid to make waves. When you're trying to change a system that is so broken as the food system here in Marshall County and in America, don't be afraid to make waves. Don't be afraid to preach truth to power, and just rely on your gut.
And then educate yourself. It's so powerful, the information that is kind of right there that you can just learn about. You know, people are like, oh, I don't want to take a racism class or a workshop. And it's like, okay, but you can actually go online to a bunch of different websites and just learn on your own. What does it mean? What does white privilege mean? What does structural racism? What did the Homestead Act do to help America to build wealth? Look at redlining. What is redlining? What did that do to help to again continue to keep people in poverty? Just educate yourself and make yourself aware of some of these political just awful things that seem to continually keep this cycle going of haves and have-nots in our community.
All right. Thank you so much. We have some more time here. I want to make sure that we give people a chance to kind of respond with some question and answer.
Laura, could you answer or talk just a little more about what kinds of things can happen to a child as far as their behavior if they don't eat properly? Do you know of any specific things you can mention?
I think there's a lot of studies, again, education. There's a lot of studies on behavior and how sugar, there's a lot of addiction to sugar. There's a lot of addiction to the fast food, processed food. And it's just like, it's like being diabetic. So when they eat the bad food, then, their energy rises and then they fall. But it does lead to higher rates of ADHD. It leads to hyperactivity, bad behavior. It's I think one of the best stories I can share, and I was it was actually a shelter at in our Healing Kitchen classes. So we have a curriculum that's 8 sessions long, and it really covers all the gamuts of nutrition, how to cook low-cost, healthy foods, how to use food pantry foods and mix those with healthy foods and all that. So I was observing a class, and I'm sure this happens here too. God love Panera and Starbucks or whatever. They donate their day-old big rolls and donuts and like the worst of their, right? You don't get the good stuff. So I'm at the shelter, and they had these big boxes of the big Danish, like the really big ones. And one of the participants went over, and she was sitting right next to me, which kind of shocked me. And she ate one big old roll, and I'm like, okay. And then she went and ate another one, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. You're sitting right next to me, and I'm teaching you about nutrition and how bad this is. I thought, well, okay, it's bold. As we proceeded to cook, I watched her get almost violent. She ended up like threatening one of the other participants in the class, and was eventually evicted from the house. And I'm like, was it because you ate 2 rolls and that sugar just went straight? Because she was fine prior to that. So there are a lot of studies and that'll link that to that. But yes, it's proven, especially in school, there's a lot of really bad activity.
On a global level and also on a national level, there's 3 age cutoffs when it comes to a good nutritional intake. The first 1,000-day window from conception up until age 2, when the mother is pregnant and breastfeeding, and then up until when the child hits the age of 2. If that mother and the child, so as the mom while she's pregnant and then the child after birth do not have the correct nutritional intake, they will cease to thrive. And that's the global terminology. But essentially what it means is If that child does not have the right nutritional, the right mix of fruits and vegetables and everything else, all those glorious, sexy veggies that we all love, and fruits and yum, 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 they will not hit certain developmental milestones. So mentally, emotionally, and physically, they will be stunted for the rest of their life if they do not have good, proper nutrition for those first 1,000 days. And then the next milestone is age of 3. Same thing. That's a whole other developmental block of time that you need to be very intentional about good nutrition. Again, if that nutrition is not met, then there are further developmental and physical stunting. And then once you hit the age of 5, it's a no-go. So globally, and also here within the U.S., there's lots of initiatives to try to do early outreach for that first 1,000-day window, and then the 3-year and the 5-year windows, because those are the spaces of time when we can make the most difference and have the greatest impact on the lives of these kids moving forward, both for teaching how to prepare and consume healthy, nutritious foods and breaking that cycle, but also physically so that they can thrive and succeed as God intended.
So one of the other programs I manage is prenatal and infant care, our network, and I'm inviting all of you. Our next luncheon is May 23rd at our Allen County Public Library, and we're having our Allen County Commissioner of Health, Deb McMahon, and we're having a Dr. Swagonski from IUPUI, and they're both physicians. They're both, they're discussing early childhood development and what stressors and trauma can do to that development, and then what happens after year 5. So through that prenatal stage through year 5. And one of the traumas is poor nutrition. And one of Dr. Swagonski's slideshow, they have 2 mice, it's a study. So they have 2 mice that are identical in DNA. The one mother had poor nutrition. They fed the mouse really bad things. And then the other one they took really good care of. And so they show MRIs of these 2 brains. Again, DNA has nothing to do with it. And it's a significant difference on the development of that brain in the mouse that was exposed to poor nutrition versus good nutrition. So if I could say anything that really isn't on food necessarily, but if we can get the early interventions in the pregnancy stage and those early development stage, one of the best programs is Early Head Start. As you said, one of the best run government programs I've been around and exposed to on my way pre-K, anything like that. Those safe, stable, nurturing environments in those first years will make a significant difference on our future. So anyway, May 23rd in Fort Wayne, if you want to come to the prenatal and infant care luncheon, please join us.
So I think we have time for one more question if anybody has anything they want to respond to, things that they heard or clarifying questions or...
I heard this on the news about 2 days ago. They said the reason why children are having depression is due to poor nutrition. Is that a fact?
So I'm not a doctor, so I can't say for sure. But definitely it's one of those things that, leads to all these various issues of not having that nutritional meal. We're talking fresh fruits, produce, not as much, red meat and things like that. Those truly, truly play a big difference in terms of your behavior, your cognitive abilities. It affects everything. And so I definitely understand that it probably does affect that. So.
Any mental illness or depression, I'm not a doctor, but I swear I play one every day. It's a brain chemistry issue, and part of that chemistry is good nutrition and feeding your brain. So it does lead, there are direct ties to anxiety, depression, and those type of and ADHD, all of them.
One thing that I like to say frequently is food is medicine, and good food is good medicine. And you know, when you're advocating and working towards good policy, food is medicine. The St. Joseph Health System, their community health needs assessment for Marshall County, when it came out, it ranked hunger and nutrition as one of the highest needs in Marshall County. So this is a hospital system trying to assess what the greatest needs are in Marshall County, and they said proper nutrition, food is medicine. So yes, I would say that I don't know what the direct correlation is, but I bet there's a ton of studies we could probably find that show that. And yeah, the better food, the better nutrition that we can get into our children and into our families, the healthier our society will be.
I've also heard pay your farmer now or pay your doctor later. Either way, you're going to pay. So pay for some good food and enjoy it.
Right. We always say you are what you eat, which really, right?
Well, I think the themes that we went over today are a great kind of encapsulation of what when we're talking about this idea of integral ecology, of wrapping up the health of the land and the food system with the help of our communities, and how those all interrelate and overlap. And I've just been floored and so thankful for you ladies for coming. Let's give them a round of applause. And thank you also for our special guest today, coming all the way from Northwest Indiana. Thank you. Oh, yes. Okay. So, just so there's no collusion, I'm not going to draw the name. I want somebody. Unfortunately, I'm going to put it on you guys. So, this is the raffle for that people have been putting their name in for. So, if you draw the wrong, most people are going to be upset with whoever draws it, unfortunately, except for the one winner. But we selected, I selected a group of, you get a book. If your name gets drawn, you get a book as well as a local food product, whether that's maple syrup or canned beef from our property. So, the winner for today is Sherry Lawmaster. So, Sherry, I'll connect with you back over at the booth to come and claim your prize. See you all tomorrow, same time, same place.